All right, welcome back to the Sam Sorbo Show. This is the second part of my interview with Peter McCullough, Dr. Peter McCullough, who's an internist. He sees patients on a regular basis and examines them, but he's also done a great deal of research on the COVID-19 situation. And we were talking in the previous segment about the ramifications of injecting it really boils down to injecting the terrorist bioweapon into human beings. And so here's, okay, this is just off the hook. Like, this is science fiction, and I don't care that much for science fiction, and I certainly don't like living it. So I struggle with all of this. And I want to try to, it's very scary. I also want to try to keep it a little bit light, but I'm struggling with that. So we know it's gain of function research. That's within the past 2 weeks. You were saying this is all sort of recently developed. We're trying to put the dots together and draw the whole picture of this. If it's a bioterrorist weapon, and we can concede that it is, if we are there, and it seems like we are, because now we're saying, oh, it is gain of function, right? Then creating a non-vaccine, I know we're calling it a vaccine, but it's not a vaccine in the traditional definition of vaccine. So, and actually, maybe you can talk to that. So can you describe the difference between what we are currently calling a vaccine and what we previously called vaccines?
Well, let me give the listeners a clear example. You would fall into probably that age group. So a woman of childbearing potential or a pregnant woman, we would only inject an inactivated substance in the human body. So for a pregnant woman, it would be inactive influenza, inactive tetanus, diphtheria, and pertussis. These are inactive things that the body can just respond to. We would never inject into a woman's body something that's active, that circulates and damages blood vessels, causes blood clotting, and causes damage to organs. We would never do that. And that's what these set of products do. Pfizer, Moderna, J&J, and AstraZeneca. They do it by different mechanisms. They trick the body to produce the spike protein, which is the product of gain of function research, which is the product, in a sense, we believe, of bioterrorism development.
So that goes to the mRNA, which if you go to the Moderna website, you will see this is their new technology. This is why they call it an operating system, because what they're doing is they're training the body to create. But what they're training it to create is the actual weapon of bioterrorism.
Yes.
I mean, I struggle with this. I know people who went and got the shots. I know them. They're good friends of mine. Okay, sorry, we gotta keep moving on. So, shedding. Talk to me about shedding.
Well, the revelations that you brought forward, Ms. Sorbo, really are a bombshell for America. I think you may be the first one to actually put it all together, just as stated. I've had family members and friends. I've said 70% of my patients were vaccinated. I think all that happened before we actually started to figure out what's going on. There was an unleashing of a bioterroristic weapon, SARS-CoV-2, the virus, COVID-19, the syndrome, spreading from person to person in population. We're over that now. We're basically over it. And now we're giving it to the people who haven't had COVID-19. We're giving them a dose of the same thing. And a paper in New England Journal of Medicine published yesterday in children aged 12 to 15, 2,200 kids, they were vaccinated. The vaccine prevented 14 cases of the sniffles later on over the next 2 months. But you know what it did to 2,000 kids? It made them deathly sick. These kids were sick for 2 weeks with the circulating spike protein, product of bioterrorism. They had fevers to 40 degrees, joint aches, muscle aches. Figure 2 in New England Journal of Medicine of the paper yesterday, May 27th, I think every parent ought to look at and ask themselves, do I want to do that to my child?
We are so conditioned. You probably don't know much about me. I'm a homeschooler. I've advocated, and I'm an education activist at this point, because being outside the system for over a decade now, I have come to understand the systemic problems of our education system. And one of them is we teach people to sit down, shut up, don't ask questions, and follow directions. And so we have a nation that's following the directions from people who may or may not know, people who may or may not have their best interests at heart, and those two things combined. And that puts us in a very difficult position because I'm a rule follower. I tend to do what I'm told. I used to joke that I follow directions really well because people would tell me, oh, you should do a podcast. So I did. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's crazy. But I will say I'm very shy of new technology. And when I heard these shots being called new technology, I went, but I don't even get the new iPhone when it comes out. Why would I go and inject myself with something? I'm largely skeptical, and now I'm tremendously skeptical of the powers that be because of the track record that we have. Also because of the laws that we have. And when I read that the FDA hadn't approved this as a vaccine, but approved it as a test scenario, I went, oh, they're in beta 3 testing, or, stage 3 testing. I don't want to be a guinea pig. But my struggle now is I think I am a guinea pig because I'm conversing and fraternizing with people who have had the shots.
Well, the phenomenon I think Americans should try to get a handle on is in December, these products were released as investigational. They're completely optional. The CDC, NIH, and FDA say, we don't know if these are going to work. They could cause a local injection site reaction all the way to death. You do your own research on the VAERS, and it's completely optional. That was in December. Now we're in May. Listen, these vaccines are nothing close to being optional. They are now conditions of employment, passports, all different forms of coercion. They're now raffles for $1 million if someone will take the shot. I've been following the data pretty carefully. I'm an editor of 2 major journals. I'm one of the most published people in the world right now on COVID-19. I've dropped all of my academic efforts to focus on this. I never thought I'd be testifying in the Senate and local bodies of government and be a TV figure. I was just on Laura Ingraham last night, but I have to tell you, as a person, I couldn't be more disturbed with what's going on. There is, I mentioned it last night on Laura Ingraham, there is a mental contagion. There is some type of neurosis or something spreading from mind to mind. How could a reasonable person of any a decent framework of understanding things basically take an investigational vaccine that's caused more harm than any medical product in human history and turn around and force it on their employers or force it on their customers, or heaven forbid, volunteer your kids up for the vaccine? When they've showed parents who've taken their kids in from the vaccine, they almost look like they're in a trance. And if we could go back in time and look at the very first parents that volunteered their kids up in the eugenics program in nascent Nazi Germany, I bet the trance would look the same. There is an entrancement. There is in a sense, a miasma that's coming over Americans and people in the world right now.
Do you have an explanation for it? Do you have a source? Any speculation about where that might come from?
When I was on Tucker Carlson, he started to, it was an explosive interview a couple of weeks ago. He started to go nuts. He says, what is going on? And I said, Tucker, I'm just a doctor. I can just tell you what I am seeing. I'm telling you the reality. This is a treatable virus. We can get people through it. Young people don't need to be treated. We're making this so much worse than it should be. And now we've used all of this in a sense to railroad people into vaccination. He said, who's doing this? I said, that's going to be the role of investigative reporters. And I mentioned Peter Breggin and Nicholas Wade and Whitney Webb. And within 3 days, he had Nicholas Wade on. Investigative reporters are going to have to put together all the pieces. But what's happening right now has very strong parallelisms to totalitarianism, eugenics, and more horrifying things to come, just as we saw in Nazi Germany. How the axis of evil formed without the internet back then, somehow, how did Japan get in the same mindset as Italy and Germany? How did that happen? It's happening right now. I can tell you, I get panic phone calls from the smallest islands of Indonesia, and people are doing bad things to each other, just like they would be in LA. It's going on. It's in the minds of people all over the world.
So there's strangely a German word for it that really encapsulated. It's called Zeitgeist. It's the spirit of the times. But also, they used fear, and fear softens the mind. And the minds were already softened by the education that people received. So we are compliant because we've been trained to be compliant, and it's generational now. And so once we are compliant, then we are made to be fearful. So we no longer question sort of what's happening. Oh my gosh, well, I just have to do this before I even think about it. In fact, I wrote about this in my book, this idea of, what did I call it? Abstinence of thought. So you simply, if you ever watched Gone with the Wind, she says, well, I won't think about that today. I'll think about that tomorrow. And that's what people are doing. And you're right, it is a trance. And people really have to snap out of it. You seem to, and I don't mean to press you on something that you're not prepared to speak of, but you seem to be avoiding the idea of shedding. And I've heard a lot about that. I've heard of young women miscarrying because they were in close proximity. I heard of a young woman who contracted COVID and went to get treated. And the nurse put her hand on her shoulder and said, you got COVID because you were working with somebody who got the shot. And so I do want you to address that, unless you don't feel qualified to address it, which is perfectly fine. Because the only reason that I'm really curious about it is because we're not allowed to talk about it. And I've said this before, Facebook had a group of people who were injured by the vaccines. And this is all anecdotal, right? They're claiming that they were injured. They're claiming that their father's massive heart attack is somehow related, right? There's a word for it. Correlation is not causation, right? So just because they came very close to each other, we don't know that that's the cause. Although AstraZeneca was pulled because they did correlate the cause of the blood clots with the vaccine. But my point is Facebook took the group down because you're not allowed to talk about it. And I'm skeptical enough to say, oh, they're talking about that. I don't believe it until I really see it. Makes me kind of wonder. But when Facebook took the group down, now I'm more inclined to believe what they're saying. Can you at least address the idea of shedding, the idea that somehow, because your body chemistry has changed, really, because you've got the mRNA that is now manufacturing the spike proteins that came with the virus, but now you're manufacturing it, that somehow you can now infect other people?
Well, I can tell you, you're every bit as intelligent as you are beautiful. Let me say this. I'm not an expert on vaccine technology, but I am a clinical expert, and I've served on over 24 data safety monitoring boards for major pharmaceutical programs and device programs, as well as for NIH programs. And I'll tell you this much. In the Pfizer application, there is great detail and interest in men who got the vaccine and had a woman, like a spouse, in the same house or apartment who was pregnant. And they wanted to know about her, even though she wasn't in the research study, just the man was in the research study. And that was a little tip-off that somebody is thinking about transference or some type of shedding, if you will. We can go back in time about 10 years or so, 15 years ago. There are papers written in the veterinary medicine literature about shedding vaccines. What a wonderful thing to vaccinate one animal in a herd, and then that animal could spread some other factor to another animal, and then, in a sense, immunize other animals. And that was
No. There's no such thing as herd immunity. So there can't be herd transmission because that's not allowed.
Right, but here's the idea. The concept would be you don't have to vaccinate everybody. If you just vaccinate a few people, they would spread it. Now, if we were to fast forward, literally in the last 2 weeks, we understand now that the spike protein circulates way longer than anybody thinks. In fact, the messenger RNA circulates a lot more. The Salk Institute had put out some misinformation saying, no, everything stays right here in the arm. And we knew that wasn't the case because radiologists were seeing the breast change in women. And matter of fact, the mammogram changes so much that we can't even do a mammogram for a year. We know that there's a tremendous inflammation after the vaccine. But now the paper from Harvard showing the circulating dangerous spike protein going on for 2 weeks. The question is, can that be shed? Well, there's been a couple clinical examples. On Laura Ingram, Harvey Rich joined me about a week ago, and he brought up the case of a woman who was breastfeeding. She took a messenger RNA injection, and then within 2 days, the baby was killed with looks like it had the fingerprints all of it of spike protein damaging the baby's red blood cells and platelets, basically killed the baby through that mechanism. So was the spike protein transferred through breast milk? My clinical judgment would say, yes, it had all the fingerprints. Or we don't see babies dying like that who are perfectly healthy breastfeeding to suddenly be killed with a blood disorder. The temporal association was very strong. There have been clear reports.
What's temporal association? Sorry.
The temporal association is
time.
Yeah, it happens so closely in time. It's one of the criteria we use for causality. You saw last week, let's say midweek, I was on Laura Ingram, and they showed one of the CDC leaders saying there was a video, and she said, well, we have no reason not to believe that this would cause menstrual irregularities, and we have no reason to believe. And she was using double negatives almost as a safety valve. And it's clear there have been so many women who have reported menstrual abnormalities after vaccination. It's been extraordinary. The spike protein circulates to the uterus, the placenta, the ovaries. In the Moderna application in animals, the vaccine reduced fertility in the animals. And it was just above the threshold by which the FDA would say, listen, this is going to wipe out female fertility. But they said, we'll go ahead and pass it. I looked at the language in the briefing booklet. It's pretty clear. Now, fast forward, we've given it to half the population. Women are going crazy with changes in menstruation. In fact, some women are reporting that they didn't get the vaccine, but they were close to someone else, and that had an influence. So you start to put all these links together. You're raising the concern. I don't think we have the biologic pieces yet, but you're raising the current concern is, could this be a shedding form of a injection?
And I'll just say, China ran out of women. So for them to want to limit the amount of procreation in other countries kind of makes sense, because I shouldn't say that. I'm sorry. I'm trying not to really have my head explode right now, because some of the things that you're saying, and I don't even know. Well, yeah, you know what you're saying. This is so damaging. It is so tremendous. It's so heavy that we're going to have to take a break here, because I have to let you go anyway, because I know you've got another interview. I want to thank you for speaking out, and thank you for doing this, and certainly thank you for coming on my program. And I'd like to have you back again. So please, will you come back?
No, I'd like to. I thought it was very explosive and insightful. And the only thing I can leave as final words to Americans is just look at what objectively is going on. The groundwork has been laid in Europe for forcible vaccination. That means that police or army would physically tackle individuals and jab a needle into them. Forcible vaccination is already occurring in some parts of the world in Southeast Asia. Americans ought to ask, what is so important in the vaccines or in the material being injected? Right. And who could find that of value? If we have children who don't get the illness anyway, the virus is basically gone. We have some states where there's 0 cases.
Well, that's the final straw. Is we're done. It's gone. Why are we still doing all of this? Why still the masks? Why still all of this stuff when Texas is proving and Florida is proving it's no longer a threat, folks? Come out of your fear dens and join reality.
Well, I've said, and I've told Americans twice now on national TV, COVID recovered patients are absolutely contraindicated from getting the vaccine. That translates to our agency staffers who are probably watching everything that we're saying right now. Our agency's staffers ought to know that the billboards that say a needle in every arm, those billboards need to come down. It will never be a needle in every arm. About half of Americans have been vaccinated. The vaccine centers are empty. They are empty, and they started dropping off around mid-April. Every American knows somebody who's either died or hospitalized, been seriously damaged by the vaccine. And word of mouth, we talk about vaccine hesitancy. The best way to have vaccine hesitancy is have an unsafe vaccine. The word has gotten out. Now, half of Americans have taken it. I hope those who took it and did well, I wish them the best. I hope there's some benefit to that. The CDC has already reported 10,000 breakthrough cases, and it's thought to be that's 10 to 1 underreported because they don't capture it. I mentioned that last night on national news. That means there's 100,000 people who've gotten the illness anyway, even though they've had the precious vaccine. So
Right,
I'll
so
let that be the last word.
just for clarity, a breakthrough case is somebody who had the vaccine, but then also contracted COVID after that. And I want to point out, you say it's contraindicated for somebody who's had COVID already. Here's the problem. There are people who have had COVID who don't know that they had COVID because they didn't have symptoms. And we know that there are a lot of asymptomatic people running around who got tested, who tested positive.
Well, when the clinical syndrome of somebody being sick and test positive, that's good enough to confirm that there's a case in immunity. If there's any question about suspected COVID, and that's thought to be 6 to 1, we may have 180 million people who suspected COVID. You can get an antibody test, or better yet, get a T-detect test and see if the virus has left that fingerprint on the T cells in the human body. I think that's probably the supreme test. One can go online and order that, no doctor needed, and then go to a laboratory, LabCorp, get the blood drawn and get the answer if indeed you've had COVID-19. If you have, I've already told America that the vaccine should not be administered. There is an excessively high rate of adverse events and there's no benefit whatsoever.
Dr. McCullough, thank you so much for coming on. Last word, is there some place where people can go to find some of your research or, anything?
Well, thanks so much. I've been really honored to host a program on America Out Loud Radio, America Out Loud Talk Radio, and it's called The McCullough Report. I interview the top experts, and I tell America their backgrounds, and we cite every single piece of scientific evidence as they address the topic. And so we've addressed the topic of vaccination in pregnancy. We've just addressed it with respect to childhood vaccinations. And then I had a wonderful specialist from San Francisco last week. He'll be on regarding adult vaccination. So we've covered all the topics. America Out Loud Radio, the McCullough Report is a terrific resource to go to as we become better educated. We're in this together. And I tell you, it's just when we see these things happening right before our very eyes, I feel like somehow we're in a Mission Impossible movie. We're in some type of action movie, but we're actually real characters in the movie. Something
that's what I said. It's sci-fi and I don't like to live it. We've got to go. Thank you so much for coming on the program. We will have you back soon. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right. This is the Sam Sorbo Show. I'll be right back.